For WHAS. Call 571-8484 or toll free 1-800-444-8484.
And good evening. Welcome into a very special edition of the Joe Elliott Show. Always appreciate you being along. We're at 9 minutes after 9 o'clock. And tonight, we're going to relive some of the great history of the radio station that has been the soundtrack of our lives for those of us who have grown up around these parts. 75 years ago today, radio station WHAS signed on the air.
This is WHAS, the radio telephone broadcasting station of the Courier Journal and the Louisville Times in Louisville, Kentucky.
There have been a lot of changes, a lot of water under the bridge, of course, in that 75 years. But the station has maintained an image of community service, focusing on news, weather, sports, traffic, whatever's going on in the area. Certainly the goal of Judge Bingham would be to bring information and entertainment to people all around the region, and that is certainly what this radio station has tried to do over the past 75 years. And tonight we're going to look back a little bit, talk with some of the voices that you've heard on this radio station over the past several years. We're going to listen to some of the great moments and have some fun with you tonight. So I hope you'll have a chance to join us. Lots of your favorites are coming up here. And one of the first guys I wanted to bring on here is a gentleman who is the program director of WHAS Radio, a man who has been here for the last couple of years. You know, the most important thing that a program director has to do here is he really has to understand. He has to get it. He has to realize what the station is. I think it took, when Rick Belcher toured the place back in June of, what would it be, 95 or so, I think he understood very quickly what this radio station was about, jumped on board, and he has certainly maintained that tradition. And Rick, I know you've only been here for a couple of years, but you know what a special night this is for everybody.
Well, it is, because one of the things that one quickly knows about WHAS is that it's an honor to work at a radio station like this. For many of us, in our careers, this becomes what is known in the business as a destination station. This is not one of the stations you work at for a couple of years and then just move on. Even people who have moved on, and there have been some that have gone other places, always will have a special place in their heart and on their resume, so to speak, because they did work at WHAS. And there are those of us who will just be here because this is a great station to be at. And I think honor is not too small a word to put on it. I really am honored to be here, and I think others are as well. And you sense that when you walk into the place. You sense that whenever you talk to somebody who is from Louisville or Kentucky or anyone who listens to this radio station, and there are people all over the country, and they do call me. I do hear from them. You get this sense of the radio station, which is a rather remarkable thing.
Milton Metz also joins us. Milton, a long-time voice on this radio station. Have you done about every job in this building, Milton, over the past however many years?
I was thinking about it. I think I did farm reports. I can't think of what I haven't done here. I don't know how well I did it, Joe, but I did it.
Well, we're going to surprise you with a little piece of tape here that Rick found deep in the bowels of the radio station here. We didn't know it existed, but we're going to go back to...
Am I going to like this, Joe? I mean, am I being set up here?
I don't know. The way he's looking at me, Joe, I'm not sure.
maybe we should play this at the end of the show instead of the beginning of the show, but we're going to have some fun here. We're going back to 1946 for a special Matinee with Metz on 84 WHAS.
The sun shines bright on my old Kentucky home. 'Tis summer, the children are gay. The corn...
And speaking of corn, here's Matinee with Metz.
Hi, gang. This is your afternoon guide, Milton Metz, with another issue of Matinee with Metz. We're heard Monday through Friday, 1:15 and 1:45. We have guests for you today, including our renowned Austrian musician, composer, and conductor friend, Professor Friedrich von Schulzenheimer. However, he'll be heard later on in the program. And now, with our pink eyes and noses twitching, Hutzel and his harebrained crew, we're saluting the rabbits this week, are heard in something called Who Do You Love, I Hope?
Who
is that guy?
Hutzel and his harebrained crew, as introduced by your congenial host there?
Well, there were several very kind of significant people in the history. I want to tell you and Rick. The guy who sang the opening is Tom Cactus Brooks.
Huh. I didn't know that.
Yes, he sang pretty well a cappella. And the fellow introduced me was one of the best-known morning men we ever had, a fellow named Bud Abbott. Not the Bud Abbott of Abbott and Costello,
right.
But that was when there was live musicians. Now, that sounded like a recording. It was Bob Hutzel was the director. It was a 14-piece orchestra, would you believe it? There were two vocalists, a man and a woman. There was, it was my show, and I had a second banana. There were two guys, and we tried a little comedy, a little interview stuff, a little music. But the idea of supporting, these days, live orchestra is mind-boggling, and yet it was commonly done in those days.
You had dozens of musicians on the staff, right? Because you had a live orchestra. You also had country music bands who were employed by the radio station. I mean, the station didn't play recorded music as much. They made their own music.
The first radio cowboy singer we had was a guy named Roy Starkey. Sounded exactly like Wallace Wilkinson. And then he was succeeded by Randy Atcher. And you're right about live musicians. There were instruments all over the place. Violins, saxophones, because they had their gigs here and they left their instruments in the studios, which at that time was in a fireproof warehouse at 3rd and Liberty.
Well, one of the things I noticed on the floor plan of the building that we're in right now, which was, I think the construction took place in 68 or 69, is that the office that I'm currently in was the musicians' lounge.
Really?
This is where they hung out.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
It later became the office of a deposed manager. There were 8 of us. What are there in there? 15 of us in there now?
Something like at least.
And he had it by himself. Never did anything. Sat there the whole day. Had a whole whole room. And now there are 15 of us in there.
You know, the thing about it is, though, at that time, you guys did a little of everything. You were doing staff announcing. You were doing just whatever needed to be done. You were plugged into it, right?
Yeah, we did news. Would you believe I once did a Davis Cup tennis tournament on radio?
Boy, tennis on the radio. I'm trying to get a concept of how well that would work.
The only thing worse than that would be describing a dance, you know.
Yeah. Well, you know, I guess we do a steamboat race and a fireworks display and all of those kinds of things. It is the theater of the mind, I guess. We're talking with El Mezzo, with Rick Belcher, Tony Cruz, Van Vance. A cast of thousands will be joining us as we roll along here tonight. As we go to break, let's hear a little more of Matinee with Metz on 84 WHAS.
Well, we reached the halfway point on Matinee with Metz, and we'll be back to the desecration room in just a moment after a station identification and a short bit of commercialism. We must have that, you know. Now, how about a little theme, Bob, till 1:30?
Matinee with Metz will return in just one moment. This is WHAS in Louisville, Kentucky.
Sing a song of Lipton, Lipton tea.
Yes, Lipton, the tea that's found in more teacups than any other brand in the world. Lipton, the tea that young folks and grown-ups alike really enjoy.
Lipton tea is always B-R-I-S-K.
That's right, friends. Lipton tea is brisk. In fact, brisk is the tea expert's own word for that famous Lipton flavor.
Brisk means richer flavor, lively as can be.
Right again, folks. Brisk flavor means more enjoyment because Lipton's always taste so spirited and full-bodied, never flat or dull.
Blended to perfection, brisk Lipton tea.
Yes, get a package of brisk Lipton tea at your grocer's and try it. Once you do, you'll say, Lipton tea, that's for me.
Live the dream with 84 WHAS at the Home Run Derby.
Over and over again.
See James Stewart as Charles Lindbergh in The Spirit of St. Louis this Saturday afternoon on AMC's Saturday Classics.
Here is the WHAS Storm Team forecast from meteorologist Ken Schultz. He says partly cloudy, warm down to around 71 overnight tonight. Then partly cloudy with a 40% chance of thunderstorms and a high of 90 for tomorrow. Tomorrow night, mostly cloudy with scattered thunderstorms and a low near 70. And for Sunday, partly cloudy, some scattered thunderstorms once again, a daytime high of 89. Right now, partly cloudy. It's 85 in Louisville from your official weather station, 84 WHAS, celebrating 75 years of broadcasting. It was on this date, July 18th of 1922, when this radio station signed on the air. We're talking with Milton Metz and Rick Belcher and lots of other voices to come tonight on our special 75th anniversary party here at 84 WHAS. Milton, you had been here for several years, and somebody somewhere got the idea to have a talk show. Tell me how that came about.
Well, I had just come back from vacation at that time. It was in the late 50s. And George Walsh, who was the program director at that time, had heard of a program on the West Coast where people called in their opinions. And he got a tape of it and played it. And in my absence, they decided that they would give the program to me. Now, nobody knew anything about it except what we got on the transcription. Certainly, I had never heard a talk show before.
Now, you know what happens when the one guy who doesn't show up for the meeting, sometimes he gets absolutely stuck.
Well, you're right. That's what Kaywood Ledford used to say. Kaywood said, he says, I used to miss those Friday meetings all the time. He says, until I heard that if you weren't there, they blamed everything on you. So he says, in self-defense, I would attend all of them.
Is that what happened? Is this something that you wanted to do, or did you come back from vacation and they said, hey, Metz, guess what your next assignment is?
No, they asked me. As a matter of fact, it turned out really to be the best thing that ever happened to me at the station, because it led to everything else. I mean, you do 2-3 hours of ad-libbing. You can do television, you can do street reporting, you can do commercials, anything, because you don't have a script. Many times, not many times, but sometimes a guest wouldn't show up. In the beginning, Joe, the station did not believe in the cult of personality, so they never named programs after people. Instead of calling the morning show the Jim Walton program or the Bud Abbott show, they would call it Funfair AM, some prosaic title like that.
Okay.
And in the afternoon, they would call it Funfair PM, a total lack of imagination. So they called my program Juniper 52385. That's when there were prefixes on phone numbers. Later on, they decided to call it Metz here.
Now, that show started, if I remember correctly, in, what, 1959?
Right, very good.
In 1959, and when you walked into that studio for the first time, were you concerned that because people had never really heard talk shows in this area, you got to remember, this was not a, we have so many talk shows on the air now, we had none on then. Were you all concerned that people wouldn't know what was going on and people wouldn't call?
Exactly. You got it exactly, Joe. Your fear as a talk show host in the beginning is...
Been there.
What if nobody calls, you see? Then my secondary one was, I forgot the phone number. Well, I was nervous. You know, I had never done that. Nobody had ever done that before. You always talk to the audience. The audience never talked back. So it was a new experience. I remember the topic of my first show.
Which was?
Was, should Khrushchev be invited to the United States? A pretty good topic. Right off the bat, somebody called and my heart flew out of my throat. It was really wonderful. And from then on, it took off very well, and except occasionally I would forget the phone number, and then they printed a big sign and put it in front of me, so I'd always know it was Juniper 52385.
Was it a program that the audience took to quickly?
It seemed to, yes. I must say in all modesty that if you measure the number of calls, they were steady and consistent from day one. And maybe because of the novelty at the beginning, and then I hope throughout the end of it, maybe because of the integrity of the program. By integrity, I mean giving everybody a fair shake at their opinions.
Now, George Walsh and the management, they had a very definite philosophy, if I remember correctly, the things I have heard and read and in talking to you, that they wanted the audience to talk back. They did not want El Mezzo to engage in some serious dialogue, did they?
Well, they didn't talk much about that. They didn't. I think what was good about it, they gave me no marching orders.
Really?
I decided it would be very difficult to take a point of view, because then you have to know everything about everything, and that is a very difficult position. And that's where, you know, I disagree with a lot of the talk show philosophy today. My idea was to be as neutral and down the middle as possible, because I felt if it was a talk show, it was not a talk show for the host, it was a talk show for the callers, for the listeners.
Well, it by any measure has been one of the most successful talk shows ever on the air, 34 years, I think?
Right.
And would probably still be on the air today. You were in a situation where you were getting home every night at midnight, and I can understand after 34 years of that, where you might decide you want to spend a little more time at home during the night. I'd be interested to hear from both of you, and Rick, maybe I'll start with you here. How the business of talk shows has changed over the last, 35, 40 years now. We do so much talk on this radio station, and now because there are so many talk shows, if you're going to do a talk show on this station, it has to be a special talk show. Well, how's all that changed?
Well, of course, I think what's happened here is people have explored new ways of doing it. There were certain ways, I think, in the beginning that were defined, as Milton described it. I think that when you have a situation where there's more than one talk show on at a time in a given market, you find that the host or the radio station will try to define what it is and make it different somehow. And so you get people experimenting. You get people taking points of view. You get people who don't take points of view. They do this, they do that. And it's been, I think, a wonderful thing for AM radio, because it's an area where AM radio really does excel. And people like Rush Limbaugh agree or disagree with Rush. He certainly has used the element of entertainment. He's a former disc jockey, and he understands certain things about how to use production elements, how to use a parody song, how to do all these various things, and that's worked very well for him. Now, other talk show hosts, in their own ways, define themselves and come up with different things that support what they do in a way that Rush does with him. But I think that's sort of how it's evolved.
I think one of the strengths of this radio station is that all the talk shows and the talk show hosts are very different.
Well, that's very much true, and I think in a talk show, the whole thing is the host. I mean, the callers will be very important to it, but the way the host approaches it will change very dramatically the personality and the feel you get from the radio station at that moment.
Milton, what's your feeling on the way talk shows are done now, and how the whole thing has evolved over the last 35 plus years?
Well, I think the principal change that came about was the incursion of television. And so many things had to change as a result of it. There are certain seminal things that happened at this station. One, of course, was the fact that we were a pioneer in 1922. The 37 flood was another high water mark. The 74 tornado, the Crusade for Children. These are high marks, but I would add two more to that. One is the sale of the properties by the Binghams from a family operation, which happens so much in this country. And then the incursion, as I said, of television. So you went away from live musicians. It was no longer economically feasible to have a studio orchestra. You didn't have soap operas anymore because TV soap operas took over. So radio had to find new sources of entertainment and also revenue. And as a result, you got disc jockeys, and then you got talk shows. About that, one of the big changes in talk shows was that many talk show hosts, if not all of them, but many of them, become politically partisan.
And that is true. That is certainly a difference in the genre today. We're going to come back and talk more with El Mezzo about some of his most memorable shows. We'll also hear from Ray Shelton a little later on in the next half hour, and a lot more coming up on 84 WHAS.
Joe Elliott on Kentuckiana's news, weather, and traffic station, 84 WHAS.
Welcome back. It's the Joe Elliott Show on 84 WHAS. We're talking with Milton Metz tonight. Also, Rick Belcher is here. A little later on, we'll have a cast of thousands joining us. We're expecting to hear from Mr. D. Wayne Perky and Terry Miners, and Tony Cruz will be back here in just a little bit. Van Vance, cast of thousands will be with us, and some voices from the past. Cake? Did we open the cake?
Yes.
We haven't done any of that stuff here.
Hey, man.
We should do that. Tony Cruz, of course, has joined us once again.
Your lovely bride, Jenny.
Yes, sir.
Wanted to celebrate for you on this lovely show.
Wait a minute. Who is this guy?
We were having a very respectful program here. I mean, we were getting some things accomplished.
Aren't you glad
and someone
he came
rolls in like this.
That's exactly right.
I got a tie and a coat on, and I came in here.
You know, only Metz can get away with lies because of his class.
That's right.
But anyway,
even I knew better than that one, Milton. You even fool me on this one.
Jenny brought in a cake for you, Mr. Elliott, to celebrate with the whole HAS family. It says, happy 75th birthday, 84 WHAS.
This is a real surprise for me. Although knowing my wife, it really shouldn't be a surprise because she knows how important this is to me.
It's big, and there's some, bubbly there, too.
Yeah, we have some bubbly served as well. Of course, I'm a Baptist, so I'm really having a hard time dealing with this issue right now.
But you won't have too hard a time, Cruz, man. I know you.
Well, it says grape. It says wine. There's something in the Bible about wine and good for the stomach, so we'll have to pour this out.
Should we call Mr. Mays and get a waiver here, Rick? Is that...
That's the one thing about going out over 38 states. There's always a chance.
That's right. You just
Joe
never know.
Listens to this program. He told me listen.
Does he really?
In San Antonio, yeah.
Well, good.
And we're still all here.
I hope he does listen.
Hey,
Tony, break that baby open and let's.
We'll do that.
Well, while you're doing that, I want to talk to Milton about some of his most memorable shows because.
What about the ones I remember?
Well, there have been so many, and it has touched so many people's lives. Let me just point you in one direction first, Milton, and then I want you to go wherever you want to go. But the things that I remember most about the Metz program were the nights after the tornado in '74, the hurricanes in the early '80s, where people in South Carolina couldn't get any other station but WHAS, and you and the radio station really shined because you were there for people, giving them a lot of help.
I think that's one of the great strengths of this wonderful radio station was we like laughs are big here. We like to make fun and so forth. But when the chips are down, when there is a natural occurrence, a catastrophe like the 37 flood, which preceded me, or the tornado. The tornado I remember very well because I spent 8 hours where you're sitting now. And Dick Gilbert, our chopper pilot, he was one of the few guys who could fly and report at the same time, which is, really either one of those is a full-time job. And he stayed a quarter of a mile or less in back of this fearsome tornado.
There's the champagne.
There we go.
Right in the middle of Milton's story.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean for it to...
Continue with the Gilbert story. We're going to hear from Dick Gilbert a little later.
Gilbert, who was just terrific, Gilbert looked just like a motion picture version of what a chopper pilot. He wore a silk scarf. He had that auburn hair and an auburn mustache and a rakish look, and he wore the coveralls. And yet, when I thought, what a darn fool he was to be so close to the tornado, because he was up there reporting. It was an absolutely Academy Award performance.
It was.
And I was here in the studio taking calls and sending messages. It was very thrilling, especially as we lost no lives. So it was very exciting, although there was a lot of destruction of trees and buildings. The next day I saw Gilbert, and I said, Dick, tell me the truth. I said, either you're the biggest darn fool in the country, or you know something we don't know. He says, no, I was never in any danger. I could track it, and I stayed a quarter mile behind it. It was a very thrilling time that people who went through it will never forget.
It sure was dramatic radio to listen to, and I can remember I was here at the time. I was safe at home, but I was listening to you. One of the great stories I remember, people may or may not understand, but we are really flying by the seat of our pants at a moment like that because calls are coming in from everywhere. The news team is gathering everything they can. I mean, people are running around this building. It is chaos with a purpose, I guess, is the right way to say it. I remember Wendell Ford called you from Frankfurt to check in and let you know that things were okay.
That's right, and there was another very touching call. I have some friends named Underhill who had a house that they lived in off Brownsboro Road. At the same time, they had just bought Kentucky Towers, which is formerly the Kentucky Hotel. At any rate, their home was completely destroyed, and they had a vintage cabin in the back of the house that they had lovingly put together with logs brought in from a couple of states. There wasn't a splinter left. They found stuff in the state of Ohio and Indiana, and the house was leveled. These people called that night and offered some rooms for refugees in their Kentucky Towers, and they were completely destroyed. It's stories like that went on the air and made it so melodramatic.
Joe, you have benchmarks in your life. I think that the 74 tornadoes is a benchmark in the life of this radio station.
I agree.
It was, at that time, I was 13 years old, about to become 14 years old, and that is the night that I became an HAS addict. That's when, I discovered, for example, Milt's talk show, and from that point on, it seemed like everybody listened to Wayne Perky, at least in my family and my household, and I will never forget it, all the information that came forth that evening. I remember seeing a tornado start right in front of us over close to the Brownsboro Road area. It was very frightening. And we had, at the time, we were hooked to another radio station, but still, even then, HAS had made such a presence with news and information that we went, right to it. But I will never forget that, and that made me an HAS addict at that time.
A little later on tonight, we're going to talk with some of the folks who covered that tornado, and we'll hear some excerpts from Dick Gilbert. But another series of shows that you did, Milton, which was absolutely groundbreaking at the time. Now we have Dr. Ruth and Love Lines and all these kinds of things. Tell me about how Dr. Gene Kaler, who was and is a sex and family therapist, began appearing on your program, because that was a pretty serious risk to take, I think.
See, that was one of the good things about the program. There were no talk shows that they could emulate. The nearest ones were far away, so they let me, be alone on the vine, as it were. The executives were home. Sometimes they listened, sometimes they didn't. If the phones went out, I must tell you about that. I died several times over. And the next day, I would, the program director and manager would say, "Yeah, that's tough. We'll have to have it fixed."
That's right.
And you try to do a phone-in show, Rick, without the phone working.
Oh yeah, we've been there.
But there were halcyon days. The guys fooled around. They would, when we would do station breaks, there were a wonderful bunch of guys. They would do practical jokes. You don't get that much nowadays because there's too much at stake in the way of, you don't want to offend a sponsor or lose your job. But once the guys would wait till the last minute to do a station break, when they would hear, when we were with CBS, as the network announcer would say, "This is the Columbia Broadcasting System," an announcer would make a mad dash to the studio to follow it up by saying, "And this is WHAS in Louisville." Well, this one time they had put the microphone in a paper bag and fastened it with a rubber band, and they had sent it up to the air because it was on a retracted kind of thing. And then they filled the studio full of folding chairs. And then when this fellow came in on the last second, as they're saying, "This is the Columbia," he opened the door to find 24 chairs. He had to stumble over. He reached for the mic. It wasn't there. It was up by the ceiling. He's clawing at it. It was great fun in those days.
So how did it go?
I love it when a program director. Yeah, I love it when our program director is laughing about this right now. Now, does that mean we can get by with it?
Well, one of the great things you learn, and I bet Milton will attest to this when you do the nighttime show, is when the program director or the general manager asks you how things went last night, there's really only one answer. You say, "Okay," right?
Terrific, yeah.
Because you never know who's listening. You never know if they were listening or not. So you always say, "It's going." Did you hear last night's show? If they say no, "Gosh, it was a great show."
It was unbelievable.
You were asking about the sex
about Dr.
program.
Kaler, right?
I felt very strongly about that. I thought that we could do a real service. Earlier, there had been another.
I know you helped me. Oh, go ahead.
I was sure.
He needs some more help here, too.
You'd be surprised how many people would come to some of the guest psychiatrists. I heard we had a guy working here, and as the psychiatrist who's on with me left the studio, as was the case in many times, people would approach him. This guy came up, you all know, and he would say, "Doctor, I got to talk to you. My life is a perfect mess." And I figured that was my cue to walk away, and I hope he helped him.
That
anyway,
still happens in here today, Milton.
There was a, yeah, sure, free psychiatric advice. Dr. Long, there was a guy named Dr. Robert Long who we did a program called It's Okay to Talk About Sex. And we did that. That was done more on TV and a little bit on radio. And then I met Gene Kaler, a wonderful person who had a wonderful sense of humor and yet a wonderful grounding on sexual dysfunction. And she discovered, and we discovered, that we could talk about these things freely without doing cheap shots, Joe. You know about making cheap sexual jokes.
Sure.
And people would call up with problems, and because they were anonymous, they would reveal themselves and they would ask questions. And we, there were a few sensibilities that were bruised, but most people enjoyed it. And
somebody asked what the finger was, and Dr. Kaler told them what that meant.
In four-letter words, yes, which I shall not repeat.
We don't have to do that, right? We don't have to go there.
Well, we don't have to go there, but you know, that's the thing, Milton, is because you all weren't cutting up about it and that type of thing, people knew they could trust the information that they were getting. I think that's what made your segments with Dr. Kaler so much different than some of the other shows that have come after it, where, you know, it's kind of a send-up, it's kind of a put-on. you really maintained that integrity of correct information.
Yeah, we weren't grim about it. I mean, face it, if you look at it, sex is funny. It really is funny.
Really?
I mean, nobody's picking up. You heard that?
Your wife is on the phone here to.
Yeah, she said especially. Yeah.
That's right.
Well, yeah, when I look in the mirror, I guess I see your point.
We're going to take a quick break here and come right back. It's the Joe. It's the Joe Elliott Show. Hey, listen, I know when to bail. It's the Joe Elliott Show on 84 WHAS.